In life, you know, when you get older, you'll realize it more and more. There's so many things that bother you on a daily basis. Difficult things.
Mm-hmm.
You got to go on. You can't stop.
Mm-hmm.
God has an answer for everybody, and He's still in charge. So you can't worry about things. And I think basketball taught me some of that before I ever understood it. People have asked me about a lot of things over the years: championships, big games, great teams. But here's the question that really makes me stop and think. Who were the five greatest NBA players I ever witnessed? That's not easy for me to answer. I played in an era when Bill Russell was winning championships. Wilt Chamberlain was doing things people had never seen before. Jerry West was competing on every possession, and Elgin Baylor was changing what a forward could be. Later on, I got to stand beside Kareem Abdul-Jabbar and see greatness from a completely different angle. Most people define greatness by championships, points, awards, or records. I never looked at it quite that way. To me, the greatest players were the ones who changed how you understood the game. They made you prepare differently. They made you think differently. Sometimes they even changed what you believed was possible on a basketball court. This isn't a ranking. These are simply five men who stayed with me. Let me start with Bill Russell, because when I think about him, I don't think about points. I think about what happened to a basketball game when he was standing near the basket. I played against those Boston teams enough to understand that feeling. In the 1960s, if you were playing the Celtics, you weren't just dealing with one great player. You were dealing with a system, a culture, and a group of men who believed they were supposed to win. Russell was at the center of all of it. We met Boston in the playoffs, and I saw firsthand how much of the game he could control without needing the ball in his hands. That was what made him different to me. A lot of big men could block a shot. Russell could make you think about the shot before you ever took it. As a guard, that's something you noticed. You'd get into the lane and suddenly your decision changed. Maybe you pulled up earlier. Maybe you tried to make one more pass. Maybe you hesitated for half a second. Against a great defense, that half second mattered. And Russell understood that better than anybody. People talk about his 11 championships, and they should. Nobody can take that away from him. But if you reduce Bill Russell to 11 rings, you miss the part that impressed me most. His real gift was understanding what his team needed on a particular possession. He didn't have to prove he was the most talented man every time down the floor. He wanted Boston to get the result it needed. That is a different kind of greatness. NBA's own historical profile makes the same point in a different way. Russell's influence was difficult to measure because so much of it came through defense, anticipation, and psychology rather than conventional statistics. I also got to see another side of him in all-star competition. In 1964, we were teammates on the Eastern Conference team in Boston. I was fortunate enough to win the MVP that night, but Russell was right there, doing what Russell always did, rebounding, defending, and giving everybody else room to play. That stayed with me. Basketball can make a man believe that greatness means having more points, more shots, more attention. Bill showed that sometimes greatness is knowing exactly what your team needs and being willing to give it possession after possession. I respected that because it wasn't selfish basketball. It was winning basketball. And once you played against a man like that enough times, you never forget the difference. Now, Wilt Chamberlain, the first thing I remember about Wilt was the physical presence. You could read the height and the measurements on paper, but that didn't prepare you for what it was like when the game actually started. He was bigger than almost everybody, but he wasn't slow. That was the part people sometimes forget. He could run, he could move, he could get off the floor. For a man that size, the combination was something we simply had not seen before. As a guard, you felt his presence before you ever got near him. You'd come down the floor thinking about your own defender, thinking about where your teammates were, thinking about the next pass. Then you'd see Wilt waiting around the lane, and suddenly the possession changed. You had to decide whether you were really going all the way to the basket. You had to think about the angle. You had to think about whether the ball was going to come back out over your head. One man could change the choices of 5 offensive players without touching the ball. That is rare. People will always talk about the numbers with Wilt, the 100-point game, the scoring averages, the rebounding. All of that was real. But what impressed me more was the expectation he carried every night. If Wilt had a great game, people acted like he was supposed to have a great game. If he scored 30, somebody wanted 40. If he got 20 rebounds, somebody wanted 25. When you're that gifted, people stop judging you like everybody else. They start expecting the impossible to become normal. I understood some of that myself. When you do something unusual often enough, people stop being surprised by it. Then the standard becomes whatever you did yesterday. Wilt lived with that on a level very few athletes ever have. And I think there was more to him than people wanted to admit. He could score, of course, but later in his career he showed how much else he could do. He could pass, he could defend, he could control the boards, he could change his game. When winning required something different from him, that mattered to me. Because talent can get everybody's attention. But adapting when the game asks you to become something else, that takes maturity. When I think about Wilt now, I don't just remember the size or the records. I remember how the entire court seemed smaller when he was standing on it. You had to account for him every second. And when one player forces 10 men to think differently just by being there, you know you're looking at somebody the game is never going to forget. The next man I have to talk about is Jerry West. We came into the NBA in the same year, 1960. We had already been teammates on the United States Olympic team before that. So I knew what kind of competitor he was before we ever started seeing each other across an NBA floor. Once we became opponents, that respect only grew. Jerry was never careless with the game. That is one of the first things I remember about him. Every possession seemed important to him. Every mistake bothered him. Every missed opportunity stayed with him. Some players could have a bad stretch and let it go. Jerry carried things differently. You could see how much winning meant to him. And as another guard, I noticed all the little things. He could score, of course. He could shoot from distance before that became such a big part of the game. He could get into the lane. He defended hard. He understood angles. He understood timing. But what separated him from me was how prepared he was mentally. You had to be ready for Jerry from the opening tip. There were no easy minutes against him. That was something I respected because I played the same position and carried some of the same responsibilities. When you're a guard, you have to see the whole floor. You have to know when to push, when to slow down, when to make the simple pass, and when the game is asking you to take responsibility yourself. Jerry understood that. There was also something else about him that people didn't always see from the outside. The losses hurt him deeply. He played on great Los Angeles teams, but Boston stood in the way again and again during those years. Jerry kept coming back. He kept competing. He kept putting himself in those situations where failure could hurt him all over again. That takes more strength than people realize. It's easy to admire a man when he's holding the trophy. I learned to admire the men who could live with disappointment and still show up ready to compete the next season. Jerry eventually got his championship, but that isn't the first thing I think about when his name comes up. I think about how seriously he took the game. I think about the pride he carried. I think about how difficult he was to play against because he never gave you permission to relax. Basketball teaches you a lot about people. Pressure has a way of showing you what somebody is made of. With Jerry West, I saw a man who felt that pressure probably more than most of us ever knew, and he kept walking back onto the floor anyway. I've always respected him for that. And then there was Elgin Baylor, because Elgin made you look at the game and realize it was changing right in front of you. What I remember most was the way he moved once he left the floor. Back then, basketball was still played differently than it is today. Big men controlled the paint. Guards worked the ball around. Forwards had certain responsibilities. Elgin didn't seem interested in staying inside those boundaries. He would drive into traffic, hang in the air, twist his body, take contact, and still find some way to finish the play. You had to see it in person to understand how unusual that was. He wasn't the biggest forward in the league, but he played bigger than his size. He rebounded like a much larger man. He could score from outside, attack the basket, and create something when the possession looked like it was going nowhere. There were times when the defense did almost everything right and Elgin still found a way to get a shot up that could wear on you mentally. As a player, you like to believe good defense should be rewarded. Against Elgin, sometimes it wasn't. And that was one of the reasons I respected him so much. He brought imagination into the game. People today are used to seeing players change direction in the air, finish from strange angles, or attack the rim without fear. In our time, those things still felt new. Elgin was showing everybody that a forward didn't have to play in a straight line. He could create, he could improvise, he could make the game look different, and there was toughness behind all of that creativity. Elgin played through an era when the game was physical. There was no easy path through the lane. You got hit, you went down, you got back up. He kept attacking anyway. I admired that. The strange thing about Elgin's career is that people sometimes talk about what he didn't get. They talk about the championships that escaped those Lakers teams. They talk about Boston being in the way so many times. I understand why. But when I think about Elgin, I don't think first about what was missing. I think about what he gave basketball. Some players dominate their era. A few players help create the next one. Elgin was one of those men. He showed younger players that athleticism and creativity could become part of a player's identity, not just something that happened once in a while. Years later, when I watched the game become faster and more explosive, I could see pieces of what Elgin had already been doing. That's why he stayed with me. He wasn't simply playing great basketball. He was showing us where basketball was going. The last man I have to talk about is Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. By the time I arrived in Milwaukee in 1970, I had already spent a long time carrying a heavy responsibility in Cincinnati. I knew what it felt like when a team depended on you night after night. Then I came to the Bucks and found myself playing with a young center who already had the kind of presence that could change the entire shape of a game. Back then, he was still known as Lou Alcindor. What struck me wasn't only his size or the skyhook. Everybody could see those things. What impressed me was how composed he was for such a young player. He didn't have to rush. He didn't have to prove something on every possession. He understood where his advantage was, and he kept going back to it. As a guard, that gave me something I had rarely experienced before. Trust. I knew that if I got the ball to him in the right place, something good was likely to happen. And when a point guard begins to trust a big man that way, the whole offense becomes calmer. You stop forcing things. You stop feeling like every possession has to be created from nothing. That changed me too. In Milwaukee, I didn't have to carry basketball the same way anymore. We had a team with purpose. We had discipline. We had players who understood their roles. And Kareem was right in the middle of it. During the 1970 to 71 season, we won 66 games, then went through the playoffs and won the championship. People remember that title, and of course I do too. But what stays with me more is what it felt like to finally be part of a group where the burden was shared. Kareem was still early in his career, but you could already see the discipline that would define him for years. He took care of himself. He understood the game. He didn't waste movement. He didn't waste possessions. And he kept getting better. That meant something to me because great talent can sometimes make a young player impatient. Kareem never seemed interested in rushing his own story. He just kept doing the work. By that stage of my career, I had seen Russell, I had seen Wilt, I had seen West and Baylor, but Kareem was different for me. I didn't have to admire him from across the floor. I got to play beside him. And sometimes after all the years of trying to carry the weight yourself, the greatest thing basketball can give you is someone strong enough to help you carry it. When you spend that many years around basketball, you learn that the game has a funny way of changing what matters to you. When you're young, you think about winning the next game. You think about proving yourself. You think about records, championships, awards, and all the things people can point to when they talk about your career. But time changes that. The records eventually belong to somebody else. The numbers get passed. The arenas change. The uniforms change. Even the way the game is played changes. What stays with you are the people, the teammates who understood what you were trying to do before you had to say it, the opponents who forced you to become better because anything less wasn't enough, the coaches who demanded more from you, the men who showed you something about discipline, sacrifice, pride, or responsibility that stayed with you long after basketball was finished. That's what I think about now. I was fortunate to see some extraordinary players in my lifetime. Some of them beat me, some of them challenged me, one of them helped me finally win a championship. But the part I value most isn't that I was there for the history. It's that I learned from the people who made that history. And after all these years, I'm grateful for that.